Hi, this is Craig Stocks here for Utah Desert Remote Observatories. You can find us online at utahdesertremote.com. And today's going to be a complete start to finish as we image the Flaming Star Nebula. So stick around, I will show you exactly how I do it. So this is the scope we're going to be using for the Flaming Star Nebula. This is the 16-inch Dream astrograph. It's a fast Newtonian f3.75. It's currently outfitted with a 5-position filter wheel, so it has L, RGB, and HA filters, and it's sporting a ASI 6200 Pro monochrome camera, so we should get some really great images, really clean data with it. This scope is also available for monthly rental. You can rent it a month at a time, and that gives you full access to the computer. So you log in, put your sequences in either Nina or Voyager, and basically you're running the system. So that's the hardware that we'll use to capture the Flaming Star Nebula. That's a 16-inch Dream astrograph and an ASI 6200 Pro camera. To connect to the computer, though, that's at the remote observatory, I'm actually sitting at home in my office about 60 miles away. We'll connect using a remote desktop application. I like to use Google's remote desktop. Once I've opened up Google Remote Desktop, it shows me the computers that I have attached that I can remote into. There's the Dreamscope. So I just click on that, and that will open up a window. Basically, this is the monitor for that remote computer, and my keyboard and mouse will control it. So I'll just go ahead and make this full screen. The programs that we're going to use are Voyager and the SkyX 64-bit version. So let's go into Voyager first. And the first thing we need to do is configure the RA and DEC, the coordinates for the target that we want to look at. And to do that, I'm going to go to this icon that says Web Dashboard Beta. This is a web-based interface, but it also has a planetarium view so that we can visualize how it's going to look through the telescope. So when I connect, what I'm actually doing is connecting this web-based browser version of Voyager to the configuration that has the mount and the telescope and the camera. So when I scroll down to the virtual field of view, if I put in the Flaming Star's catalog number, which is IC405, it doesn't do very well with names. Generally you need to give it a catalog number, but it says a pretty complete catalog then. So here's the Flaming Star Nebula. And this camera does not have a rotator, but I can move this around and basically frame it up however I want. The red outline is showing the field of view of the telescope with that camera. So we just find a good field of view. And once I have that selected, I use the tool called RoboClip. And when I click on this blue button, it's going to open the RoboClip database, and I can grab the data from the virtual field of view, and that has now loaded in the RA and DEC coordinates for that view that we just defined, and I can give it a name. And you can put these into groups if you want, and then save. Now that I have saved that, you can see we have a new entry in the RoboGroup catalog for the Flaming Star. There's the coordinates and so forth. So now we can go to actually create an imaging sequence using those coordinates. And I generally will start with one that I already have. So I'll go to Tools and Editor and Sequence Editor. And I'll open the M81 Bode's Galaxy. That's just the most recent one I worked on. And you can see this is configured with the coordinates for Bode's galaxy. But if I just come to the RoboClip button, there's the flaming star sample. I say use selected target. And now we have the flaming star, and we have the sequence that I would typically use. So let's just look briefly at the sequence. We have blue, hydrogen alpha, luminance, red, and green. And if I want to change the order of these, I can move up and down just using the up and down arrows here. If I want to create new ones, I can copy and paste. For each one of the filters selected, I have the exposure time in seconds, the binning, and I always bin 1 to 1. Speed and readout mode. Gain and offset, I always use a gain of 100 and an offset of 50. And this is probably going to be a case where it's going to be easier to just undo these and then paste this back in so I get my offset and gain, and then just change the filter to red and green. So now we have 5-minute exposures for red, green, and blue, 5 minutes for luminance, and 10 minutes for HA, all using gain of 100, offset of 50. And it's going to repeat each one of those 3 times, go to the next filter, and then cycle back through. And the little visualization strip along here shows the sequence of hydrogen, luminance, blue, red, green, and then repeating. Some of the other settings, when we start, it's going to point at the target. We're going to let the computer manage the meridian flip. So we have manage set. Guiding and dithering, we're going to do 3-second exposures and 3-pixel dither. And we're going to focus by slot. So every time we change filters, the system is going to refocus, and that's going to be about every 15 to 30 minutes so that we're sure that each one of these is in focus. Now that we've got this configured, we just save the sequence to a file, and I'll just change the name here to Flaming Star Sample. And now we have a sequence created and that sequence file saved. The last step is then to go to the Dreamscope editor. And Dreamscope is just the tool that Voyager uses to configure the sequences that you want to run during the night. So I'll open the sequence file that I normally use, the Dreamscope file I should say. It looks a lot more complicated than it is. It basically has some startup values. It's going to wait astronomical night. Once we get to 30 minutes before astronomical night, it'll drop down to this sequence 1. And for sequence 1, this is the actual sequence, and I can just go to configuration and choose Flaming Star Sample, and we'll have it set to start immediately and run until 2 a.m. Click OK, and then at 2 a.m. it would finish sequence 1 and it would drop down to sequence 2 and work its way down through the list. You could have just one sequence running all night. You could have 6 different sequences running during the night, and just line them up like that. And then at the end of the sequence, it shuts down. So we just save that. And now it's ready to run. What I would do next, there's some other gymnastics that I would typically go through. I typically power cycle all of the equipment before I start the night, and then I connect the mount through the SkyX, the 64-bit version. Now, this is the software-based software that you can use for mount control, and in particular I use it with all of the Paramount mounts that I have. So I generally will start up the mount and connect it separately. That's connected. Now I'll come back to, and you can do all of this in the script. And some of the other telescopes, I just start the script and it does all this for me. This particular scope, I have to do it a step at a time. I'll go to the startup section and just choose connect, and hopefully it'll go through and connect all of the pieces of equipment: the camera, the filter wheel, the mount, PhD2 for auto guiding, the planetarium software in the SkyX, the ASTAP for plate solving. Now it's connecting the focuser, and I have that configured so that when it first connects to the focuser, it'll home the focuser and then move it back out 1800 steps, so it's roughly focused and ready to go. Both Paramount and the FLI, who manufactured the focuser that we're using, they both recommend homing the device each night before you start, just to make sure that everything knows where it should be. So now that the focuser is done and it's also connected to the safety monitor, what the safety monitor does is tell us whether the roof is open or closed. And right now it's still during the day. This little red light here at the bottom tells me that it's unsafe, which means the roof is closed. When we start the program now, it'll actually just sit in idle until astronomical dark, when the roof opens, and then everything will start running. I would typically come back and home the mount, which I can just click Find Home. We've already homed the focuser. Now we're homing the mount. And this takes, I don't know, 15 or 20 seconds for the scope to actually move to the home position. And there's an encoder in the mount that is hard programmed, goes to a fixed position to the homing stops or the homing encoders, so that the telescope knows exactly where it's starting from. So if I turn the mount off and back on, that's going to get it out of sync. We just tell it to go to home, and it'll go to its home position, and now it knows exactly where it is relative to the sky. And as soon as it finds home, the little status here will change from finding home to tracking, and right now it's saying tracking is off. So with this, we're ready to go to the drag script section, and click on the little gear icon to open our drag script file, and I just click on drag script run, confirm yes, I really want to run. So it's we're already connected, it's cooling the camera, the mount and the focuser are both homed, so everything is ready to go. Now we just let the system run, and it should run through everything with no problems, save the files to a Dropbox folder that will get automatically synchronized with my computer here at home. So when I get up in the morning, I'll have fresh data captured from the scope in my Dropbox folder. I just copy that into a more permanent place on my hard drive, and we're ready to start processing. So now it's the next morning, and we're ready to look at the data from last night. I'm going to start by just opening my Windows Explorer, and I'll go to the D drive. I've already copied the data from the Dropbox folder to my D drive in an Astro folder, and we can just go to Dreamscope data and Flaming Star, and you can see I've already processed data through here. I've got data from the 28th, the 29th, the 30th, the 31st, and the 1st. And there's the data from the 1st, blue, green, red, and so forth. So the first thing I want to do is scan through that data and make sure that it's good. So to do that, I'm going to go to Process Image Inspection Blank. And this is the tool I use to review all of my data. I'll just click on the Open Add Images button, and there's the data from the 1st. So select all of those with Control A and click Open. And this opens them in a quick preview format and applies an auto stretch. So it's a quick way to step through the files and just look for frames where the wind may have caught the scope, or something happened that you don't want to include that data. Now, by default, what it does is it does an auto stretch on the first image, and then it applies that same stretch to all of the images. That's kind of okay for the red, green, and blue, but the HA and luminance are going to, HA will be too dark, luminance will be too bright. So I usually just click on this top histogram icon, and that will tell PixInsight to go through and actually calculate a screen stretch uniquely for each frame. That way we get a better look at what each frame actually looks like when it has an auto stretch applied. And mostly what we're looking for are streaking stars that would indicate wind, or poor tracking, poor focus, something like that. And I can use the cursor keys. You can see this was before and after the meridian flip. I can use the cursor keys to just walk through the files and look for things that are out of line, and anything that looks like it's more out of focus than I want. And let's say I'm not real happy with this one. It has less contrast. It looks like it may have been taken when the moon was coming up, or for some reason this is a less desirable frame. What I'm trying to do is create a folder that has nothing but good images in it. So I want to take this image out of the folder, and I don't have a way in the tool to delete it. What I do have is a way to move it somewhere. So the icon fourth from the right is Move Selected File to a new location, and what I'll do is I'll just move it to a folder called Rejects. And so I'll select that folder, select folder, and that has now been moved out of this folder into the Rejects folder. I still have it if I change my mind, but it won't be included when I just load everything in this folder. And then just continue stepping through, looking at everything and make sure it's okay. Once I've completed that step, the next thing that we need to do is load the data into the WBPP. So to get to that, we'll go to Script, Batch Processing, Weighted Batch Preprocessing, and this usually takes 20 seconds or so to open up on my computer. I'm not sure why. It used to be faster, but now it's gotten slower with new releases. And we'll just start by doing a reset, and from the settings from the last session, and clear all of the lists. So now we have a blank WBPP to work from. First, we'll load the light frames. The tabs across the top select different views. So for instance, this is the lights, the flats, the darks. So let's go to lights. The buttons at the bottom with the big green plus actually load that data. So we'll click on the plus lights, and here's the data from the first. Select all of those, select open, and then we have more days to load. So we'll go back to the day before and open. Now this, if you have a lot of folders, this can get somewhat tedious. So there is a shortcut way to go around this, but the problem is it will load other files that you may not want loaded. It'll load pretty much anything in this folder. So we'll just load them one folder at a time. There's nothing there. I have a bunch here. And I think we have possibly just a few more here. So in total, if we peek ahead, if we click on the Post Calibration tab, this tells us we have 11 hours and 10 minutes worth of data. And all of our lights are loaded now. And you can see they're sorted by filter. And if we had big differences, for instance, if we had 2-minute and 5-minute exposures, it would separate those by exposure time also. Now for the flats, darks, and bias, we can load each one of those individually. What I like to do though is just put all of my calibration frames in a folder and load those all at once by clicking on plus directory. And I'll just navigate to my calibration folder, and there I have the Dreamscope with the ASI 6200, and it says combined, and what that means is I've got the bias, the darks, and the flats all in this one folder. So I'll select the top level Dreamscope ASI 6200 combined and select folder, and PixInsight will go through looking for files within those folders that you can make sense out of and then load them in the appropriate spot. So there are all my flats, there are all of the darks, and here are all of the bias frames. Now in the darks, I actually loaded some 2-minute and some 1-minute darks, which I don't need. Just to streamline things, I can select those two by clicking and then control clicking and remove selected. So now we just have the 600 and 300 second darks that we need. Now we'll go to the calibration tab and just do a little bit of final setup. I like to use a 300 pedestal, and what this does is avoid having negative values when it does the calibration. And when I click apply to all light frames, what that's going to do is go ahead and apply this to each one of these light frame sets. We'll use auto registration, and we just choose a swap folder. The PixInsight generates a lot of intermediate files, so I use a working folder for all of the files as PixInsight runs. Now that it's configured, we just click on Run. It will give me a warning that I can't have long file names. I won't, so that's not a problem. Everything else is good. I've got enough space on my hard drive, so I can just click Continue, and it will go off and run. Once WBP has finished, we can exit out of the WBPP script window, and now we're ready to actually look at the files that we got. And the easy way to do that, if I just double click somewhere on the field here, we can navigate to that swap files, Flaming Star, and you'll see that there's calibrated, logs, master, and registered. And these are all of the intermediate files that it created working up to the masters. And in the master folder, there's going to be master lights, master darks, master flats, and what we want are the master lights. And since I've run this multiple times, here's the most recent: red, luminance, green, blue, and HA. So there's the 5 that we just created. And just click on Open, and PixInsight now will open those files, 5 files for us, so we can work on the files in PixInsight and get them ready to fine-tune in Photoshop. It sometimes takes a few seconds for each file to load. What we're going to do, we're going to start by combining the red, green, and blue into a single RGB image, and then we'll close the individual red, green, and blue mono files and have just the one color RGB image plus the luminance plus the H alpha. And of course all this at this point is mono data, and all of this is still linear, which is why everything looks dark. If we use the screen stretch function and apply an auto stretch, that lets us see what the image is going to look like once it's stretched. And just as a little indicator, there's a green bar over here on the left tab. That green bar tells us that we're looking at the file with an auto stretch or a screen stretch applied. So the first thing I want to do, I've got icons lined up on the right that are basically my workflow. So I'll start with channel combination, and that lets me combine red, green, and blue channels into a single image. So a couple ways you can approach this. You can use the drop down and then select, we want the red data to go in the red channel. I can also grab the file name over here on the left and just drag and drop it in. There's our green, there's our blue. Click the solid circle to apply it, and there's our new RGB color image. So we're actually done now with our blue, green, and red individual files, so I can close those and clean up the desktop a little bit. Let's look at our color image. We'll apply the screen stretch, and typically we'll have a strong color cast. In this case, it's a very strong magenta color cast. I generally will use dynamic background extraction as a starting point, and I know I've got some nebula up here that is not background, so I've saved an instance of the background extraction that has the samples already pre-positioned. I'm going to go ahead and select and delete these three across the top because I know there's nebula there rather than background. And then we'll just click the green check mark to apply that, and that will do a background neutralization, and also it'll clean up any gradient that might be in the image. And we refresh the screen stretch, and that's what it looks like at this point. The next step that I would do is to apply Blur Exterminator with corrections only. And I think the stars are actually in pretty good shape. Let's just do a quick image analysis with the aberration inspector. And this will give us a view. So there's the corners, the edges, and the center, and they'll actually look pretty good. They will probably look better once we apply the Blur Exterminator. So I can just grab that icon, drag it onto the image, and it takes about 30 seconds for Blur Exterminator to do its thing, and it will clean up any aberrations, even some tracking errors. It's amazing how well it really works. But we'll let it work its magic. So it is done. Again, we can update the screen stretch to see how it looks. And the stars do look a little bit tighter. Let's just do a quick image analysis. They look a little bit tighter. Corners are all pretty consistent, but I don't see, there's really not much difference in the before or after, but it does tighten up the stars a little bit. And that one of the recommendations was to run correct only before running spectrophotometric color calibration. So that's what we'll do next. And again, I have instances of SPCC for the various systems that I run. Here's the one for the Dreamscope. So we apply that. And this is going to go through the Gaia catalog for the stars that are in this image, look at their makeup, and then try to find a white balance that gives us a good match to the correct star colors in the image. So again, this takes about 15 or 20 seconds to run. When it's done, then we'll continue on. So SPCC has finished, and it gives us this report, and by seeing that the dots, which are the star samples, are along the straight line, that tells us it did a good job of fitting the star color to the true color based on the white balance that it chose. So again, we'll update the screen transfer and get a fresh look at it. So we're kind of homing in on looking at this in its best way possible. At this point, we've done a fair amount of pre-processing of this color image. Let's get caught up with the HA and luminance, and then we'll start processing them all together. So let's go to the HA, and sometimes I do, sometimes I don't run dynamic background extraction. I think in this case I will, because this corner looks a little bit dark compared to the upper left. So I think there's a little bit of a gradient there. And again, I'm going to delete these three samples at the top and click the green check mark to apply that. And that evened it out nicely. Now we have to close this, go to our next image. I'll apply the screen stretch and then open it again. And let's just do the same thing. We'll delete these three samples, apply dynamic background extraction, close that and update our view. Now these are ready for Blur Exterminator, and the color image is ready to have Blur Exterminator run in its full format to sharpen the nebula in the background. So I really want to run Blur Exterminator on all three images. To do that, I'm going to create an image container. And an image container is just a list of images that you want to operate on. So I'll right click on the background, and from the pop-up menu choose Image Container, and let's reset it. What pops up here, this is not an image container. This is a tool to create an image container. So first we have to select either the files or the views, and in this case the files are open, so these are views. And we want to put these three views into an image container. I could double click each one individually, or I could choose Select All. Okay, now we have those three listed. Now from the triangle at the bottom left, I can drag that out and create a new instance. That now is an image container, and it represents these three views or these three images. So now I can just take my Blur Exterminator saved process icon, drag it onto the image container, and now PixInsight will go through and run Blur Exterminator one by one on each one of these files. It doesn't really save any processing time, but it saves me time because I can go off and check email, get a cup of coffee, do something else while the computer's running for a minute and a half or so, without having to sit here and click go every 30 seconds. So we'll pause the video and wait for Blur Exterminator to work its magic. Okay, Blur Exterminator has done its thing on all three files. So now we're ready to stretch them. Files are all still in their linear state, and we can tell that we're looking at the screen stretch by the green bar. Because I do my final work in Photoshop, I don't need a real precise stretch. I just need a good stretch with good data throughout the histogram without anything clipping. And the screen transfer function auto stretch is a very good starting point for me. So we'll open up the screen transfer function, and then of course we'll be using the histogram transformation to be able to apply that stretch. So we'll go file by file, we'll update the view, and then I can use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out on the sliders here at the top, and because the channels are linked, if I move one of them, it moves all of them. Typically I'll find I want to darken the darks a little bit and brighten the brights just a little bit. So I may adjust the contrast a little bit on each file, and then grab the triangle, drag it down to the bottom bar of the histogram transformation, click the square to apply it, and now we have that stretched. I can turn off the auto stretch, and now the green bar is gone, and that's what that image looks like. Let's move on to the luminance. Again, we'll update the stretch. Maybe we'll do a little bit of fine-tuning on this one and apply that. And lastly, we'll go to the HA, update the stretch. And again, we'll add a little bit of contrast, and we want to really bring out the hydrogen, because the Flaming Star Nebula has two distinct characteristics, at least to me. One of them is the bright blue reflection nebula that we have going on in the center, and the other is the rich, undulating, ionized hydrogen field. So we want to, in our processing, we want to be able to bring out both of those as best we can. So now we have all three of those stretched. The last step for each image is to apply Noise Exterminator. I don't know if we have much noise here, but it's just a step I always apply. And then Star Exterminator to separate the stars from the nebula background. And just like we're using an image container here to represent these three images, and these three images, even though we've worked on them, the image hasn't changed its name, so the image container is still valid. I have over here a process container. In a process container, Like an image container, it contains multiple processes. So this one contains noise exterminator and star exterminator with all of the settings applied that I want to apply. And specifically, that would be to save the stars using the unscreen process. So we just grab this saved process icon, drag it onto the image container, and now PixInsight is going to go through and run noise exterminator and then star exterminator on each one of these 3 files. So it's actually doing 6 operations. Again, I'm going to pause the video while it runs, and we'll be back in a couple minutes. So we've completed running noise exterminator and star exterminator on each one of the files. Typically the last thing I'll do before I save these are the RGB stars. I have a little saved icon that I call enhanced stars. It's just a curves transformation that applies a little bit more saturation. What I find is when you start increasing the saturation of the nebula behind the stars, you have to increase the saturation of the stars for those to stand out. And the file's never going to be any more pliable than it is right now. So I'll apply the enhanced stars, which boosts the saturation a little bit. And it probably looks a little unnatural here, but once we're done with it, it will look fine. So now we want to save the files that we want from here as 16-bit TIFF files. So obviously the RGB color stars we want. So I'll just go to File, Save As, and go to the folder where I'm doing my work. Click Save. Guess it's okay to overwrite that. And I'll save this as a 16-bit TIFF. Click OK. And now I can just iconize that. Now, this is the hydrogen alpha stars, which we're not going to use. This is the luminosity stars, which I'm also not going to use. There is our starless hydrogen alpha. So save as, and we'll navigate to the folder where we have the Flaming Star data and save this as a TIFF. And this is a 16-bit TIFF. Minimize that. Here's our luminosity. So again, navigate to the folder where we want to save it, and your folder management may be very different from mine. That's fine, as long as you know where you saved it and you can go find it later. That's all that really matters. And lastly, here's the RGB color that we produced now in a starless image. And here's where you really see that blue-gray reflection nebula. And there's also some fun reflection nebula going on down here. So we'll do a save as. And again, navigate to the folder. Save this as a 16-bit TIFF. And at this point, we are now done in PixInsight. We've created the 5 or 4 files that we need to go into Photoshop. So I'll go into Photoshop, and if you've watched any of my tutorials before, you know the first thing we do is go to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack. And this is a script that comes with Photoshop, and it's been in Photoshop for as long as I can remember. First, we select the files that we want to load. So we click on Browse and just navigate to the folder where we just saved those files. And I like to just keep my folders in descending date sequence, so the ones that I want are right on top. Click OK. So there's our list of files. Click OK. And what this is going to do is Photoshop will now load each one of those files as a layer in the layer stack over on the right side. So the first thing we'll do is a little bit of housekeeping. So this is our RGB image on top. So I want to put each one of these into a group so I can work on the group separately. The easiest way to create a group is to select the layer or layers that you want in the group and Control G, or that would be Command G on a Mac. Double click the name and give it a name. And then I know I'm going to be adding a levels adjustment layer, so I'll just go ahead and add that now. A note about the behavior of this. Right now what's selected is the group name. And so within the group is this one image6.tiff. And I can, of course, expand and collapse that group or turn the group off and on. If I add an adjustment layer while I have a group selected and that group is open, by default, it will put that adjustment layer inside the group on the top, which in this case is the behavior I want. If I wanted this to add this above this group, then if I close that group and add an adjustment layer, now we'll add it above the group. So let's just go ahead and turn off RGB. Here is our luminance. We'll just do the same thing. Drop it into a group. Change the name. And add a levels adjustment. Here's our HA. So we'll just name it. Drop adjustment levels in there. And now we're down to our stars. Again, we'll drop it into a group. Stars. This one I'm going to add a levels adjustment and also a hue saturation. And I will probably, just from experience, I know I'm going to wind up doing this anyway. I'll increase the saturation a little bit more. And what you'll find is the reds and oranges get overwhelming, especially once you put them on top of a red nebula. So what I'll do then is target just the reds in the hue saturation and decrease the saturation of the reds. And now we have stars that'll look pretty good on top of the image that we're going to create. We'll drag it up to the top of the stack because we want our stars on top, and we'll put it in screen blending mode. And if you recall, I think I mentioned when we ran Star Exterminator, we used the option to unscreen the stars. So to put the stars back in, we use screen blending mode. If we just simply turn on the RGB layer, there's our image put back together with an RGB background and the stars above it. But now I can work individually on each layer. So for instance, if I want to reduce the stars a little bit, I can open up that stars group and just use the levels adjustment to darken the stars, and that'll reduce their presence a little bit. I can also go to just the RGB background, and let's start by neutralizing the background. It looks like it has a little bit of a cyan color cast to it. I think there's a spot right here that's about the darkest spot in this whole image. And if we want to find out for sure where the darkest spot is, we can add a solid color in black and put it in, I think, was it divide blending mode? Looks like we've got an area here that's even darker. You see where it's blue. So apparently actually the blackest spot in the image appears to be right there. So let's take a color sampler, and we may or may not actually want to use this spot because it's kind of on the edge of the image. I think down here might actually be more representative, so I'm going to go ahead and move this sample down here. And what I want to do is use a floor level of RGB 19, 19, 19 as the darkest points in the image. You'll find as you get darker than that, it all tends to mush together. So at least at this point, I want to keep everything at least 19, 19, 19 RGB or brighter. So we'll start with this levels adjustment, and let's look at the color readouts. We can see right now we've got red is 6, green is 47, and blue is 33. Looking at these values for the color sampler. So I want to adjust each color channel individually. So I'll start with the drop down here. I'll choose the reds. And we actually need to brighten the dark areas of the reds. So to do that, I'll use the lower slider, which will brighten the blacks. And what I'm watching is this value right here. And I want to raise the slider until that gets to 19. Then we'll go to the greens, and the greens are just the opposite. They're too big, so we need to darken the blacks by bringing the left slider in, and we'll bring it into 19. And then we'll go to our blues, bring it into 19, and now we have neutralized the background. We may need to revisit this as we work on the image, but that gets us a pretty good starting point. And I'm just going to rename this neutral blacks. Now I want to add another layers adjustment or levels adjustment layer. And now I'm going to actually work with the brightness and contrast. And as we work with this, we may find the blacks start to brighten up a little bit, so we just bring them back down to that 19, 19, 19 region. When I move the right slider in, I'm brightening the brights. The midtones darkens or brightens the midtones, and then the one on the left darkens or brightens the blacks. So we'll say that's good for now. So there's our RGB background. And let's just go ahead and close that, and let's look at the luminosity. We've already got our color sample here, so we'll do the same thing with our luminosity. We'll adjust it down to 19. And since this is an RGB, it started as a grayscale, but it's a black and white, the channels are all the same. So it doesn't matter whether I'm moving the red, green, or blue. We want to move all three of them together. So now we've got it at 19, 19, 19. And again, we'll probably brighten up the brights a little bit. And we may have to fine tune. But that gives us good contrast. By the way, you'll notice I'm using a black background in Photoshop. You can right click on that background and change it to the default color or to a custom color, which I have set as white. Typically with Astro images, I keep it in black. And that gives me a quick reference for my black areas relative to a pure black. The last one we'll look at is hydrogen. And again, we'll adjust it. We'll bring the blacks down to 19. And adjust give it some contrast. Keep the blacks down around 19. If you have trouble moving the slider, you can click in the box and use the cursor keys to adjust. In this case, it wants to go either 18 or 20. In order to get 19, I can use the midpoint slider and fine tune it there to get to 19. And if you can't get precisely where you want, that's okay. Now let's add some color to it. There's two ways I normally would add color, and two different approaches. Sometimes I start with the narrow band data and then add RGB on top. Sometimes I start with RGB data and then add narrow band on top. And it kind of depends on which one has light detail that I want to bring out. Because I'll typically add it in either lighten or screen blending mode, which lightens. So in this case, I'm going to keep hydrogen on the bottom because we know our RGB data has some bright areas, and it's this reflection nebula that we really want to add on top of the hydrogen background. So we want to turn this layer red. Two ways we can do that. One, I can go to the blending options, which I can get to by just double-clicking to the right of the layer name. And since this is an RGB image, if we look at the Blending Options tab, we can see that all three channels have check marks. If I simply turn off green and blue, now we have a red image. So that's one way, very quick, easy way to get your hydrogen data turned red which is typically what you want. Then we can go to the RGB data, turn that layer on, and as I mentioned, we want to use this to lighten what's below. So I'll change the group. Notice, again, I'm on the group level, not the individual layers within it. And I'm going to change its blending mode to lighten. And you can see what's happened now. It is, we're using the RGB data to bring out more detail. It's kind of overwhelming the hydrogen. So we'll do two things. We'll brighten the hydrogen a little bit to give it more of a fighting chance, and then we're also going to darken some of the midpoints and dark areas of the RGB to let the detail in the hydrogen take a little bit more presence. So now that's without the RGB, that's with RGB. There's some interesting stuff happening in the luminosity. Especially in the peripheries around here. And I admit I've already played with this data, so I kind of know where I'm going. There's one way to do this would be to add the luminosity to the RGB. So to do that, let's just explore it. We'll turn off the hydrogen, and I'm going to put the luminosity data on top of RGB. So now we've got luminosity and then RGB, and I'll put luminosity in luminosity blending mode. So now we're taking the color from our RGB file and applying the luminosity from luminosity. What I find is you start to lose some of that contrast between the red background and the blue reflection nebula, and it works better in this area without the luminosity data, but around the edges it works better with that data added. So what I'm going to do is just quickly add a layer mask here, and I can get to that by using the, looks like a front-loading washing machine icon down here at the bottom right. That adds a layer mask, and when the layer mask is white, that means it reveals or lets everything on this layer show through. If I paint with black on the mask, then it will hide what's on this layer, or in this case a layer group, which is the luminosity. So I will grab my brush tool, which I can do by tapping B, and I want black as my foreground color and 100% opacity. So we'll change our opacity to 100%, make the brush real big, and you'll notice this is a if I look at the brush itself, it's a hardness of 0, which is almost always what I would use. And if I paint with black on the mask, you can see that's hiding the luminosity data. I actually want just the opposite, so I'm going to Control Z, and I'm going to paint with black here in the center, and that lets the RGB data from below really shine through. We probably want to adjust the brightness so that they blend together a little better. So that's a way of adding the luminance data to the RGB, and you can see it's bringing out the some of that nebulosity, that little reflection dust that's in the foreground. Let's turn our hydrogen back on, and if we turn our stars on, we're starting to get close to a finished image. I think we can do better, and I'm going to do something a little bit unusual with this luminosity. I'm going to change it to soft light blending mode, and now I'm going to have to make some really big changes in the levels. I'm going to have to brighten the blacks and then darken the whites. And what this is doing is bringing more of that luminosity into this dust, bringing more of that into the image. So this is another approach to add that data. Let me reset this and start over. There we go. Now you can really see this dust starting to show through down here, but I really only like it in this area, so I'm going to re-engage the mask and let that dust just show up down there. And then again, we can turn the hydrogen back on. We may need to adjust its brightness a little bit. So lastly, let's do some global adjustments. Let's add a, now I'm on top of this top layer, and I'm going to add a levels adjustment layer, color balance, hue saturation, and then the last thing I'm going to add is a solid color. And this is going to be, I want 19, 19, 19 for my floor level for RGB. Shortcut way to get that is to use the hex values 13, 13, 13. Click OK. Put this in lighten blending mode. And what this does is ensure that there's no values anywhere in this image that are darker than 19, 19, 19. So now I can continue fine-tuning the global brightness and contrast. I might want to adjust the color a little bit. We can adjust the saturation, boost it up a little bit. Let's darken it a little bit overall. And that's starting to look pretty good. The last thing we'll do is come back to our stars. And to me, the stars look too dominant. They're just too strong. So to change that, screen blending mode is the correct blending mode, but we can also use lighten, and it's less aggressive. And it does a really nice job with most of the stars, other than these real bright stars that actually looked quite a bit better with screen. So we're going to do both. So I'm going to duplicate my stars layer, and I'm going to do that with just Control J on the keyboard. Why is that not? There we go. And we'll put this top one in screen blending mode, and we'll go ahead and let those stars really shine. Now I want to add a layer mask to the screen copy of the stars, and we'll invert the mask with Control I so that it hides everything, and then just come back with a brush, and now we'll paint with white, which I can switch white and black by tapping X on the keyboard, and we'll just bring back the screen versions of the stars here, along with the diffraction spikes, and we'll just go around and bring back some of these larger stars and their diffraction spikes. Let's say something like that. The last thing we want to do is make sure that our layer mask is using one or other of the set of stars, but not both. And to do that, we've got this layer mask that we've just adjusted. We'll hold the Alt key or Option on the Mac, drag it down to the other stars layer, drop it there, and then invert this mask with Control I. So now we have stars added with a lighten blending mode here, and stars added with screen blending mode here. So those two groups together make up our stars. Now, if we want to put those into just one master group, we can just drop those into a group, label it stars. And there's a fairly complete image. At this point, I would save the image, and I'll save this as in my 2024 folder, and I'm going to save this as Photoshop's large document format, which will let me go up to 64-bit, huge 64 gigabyte or something file size, and we'll just give it a name. So notice that I have not cropped the image at all. I always leave the image uncropped until I'm actually ready to use it for something, because I will probably crop this into different sizes and different aspect ratios for different purposes. If I'm going to use it as a screen background, I want a 9:16. If I want to use it in a video, I probably want the 9:16 aspect ratio. If I'm going to print it, I would probably print it more like an 8:10 or 16:20. Those are different aspect ratios than the screen. So now that that's saved, we will go into Lightroom. And actually Lightroom Classic. And this is where I keep all of my images. So Lightroom, besides having some develop and cropping tools, it also lets you create derivatives like the JPEGs to post on Facebook, or to if you need to create an image to print or to send to a printer. You do all of that in Lightroom. It can also add watermark if you want. And we already have some data in our 2024 folder, and you can see I've already processed this image. So what we want to do, as soon as it's done getting itself loaded, we'll scroll down to where it shows in our list of folders, where it shows the 2024 folder, where we just saved this image. And throughout the year, I'm going to just keep adding files this way. And as I add them, I'll just come to the folder, right-click on that folder in the directory listing, and choose Synchronize Folder. And I'm going to import one new one, and I want to make sure I have not checked Remove Missing Folders, because I let everything accumulate in here. Even if I delete the file from my hard drive, I keep the thumbnail in Lightroom, so I still have it as a reference. Click Synchronize, and it's going to go find that new file that we just added and import it into Lightroom so it's ready to work with. Now that it's in Lightroom, I can do things like give it a rating. I can go to the Develop module by tapping D on the keyboard, and if we want to adjust the brightness and contrast, we can play with that. I may want to add a little bit of clarity, some negative texture, further reduce the stars. We may want to fine-tune the color a little bit to let it have a little bit more of a yellow look to it. We can go to the Detail tab and adjust sharpening and noise reduction if we need to. So basically anything that you need to do in Lightroom, you would do here. And the last thing I would do is go to the Crop tool, and this is where I would actually crop the image. And let's crop it to a 16:9. This is all non-destructive, so it's recording where I want it cropped, but it's not actually cropping the image. It's just showing me a preview that when I create a derivative image from this, that's what it's going to look like. So I've talked about creating derivative images. The way you would do that is go back to the Library module and go to the Export option. And I have a variety of saved presets. One of them will save it as a wallpaper. The one I normally use for something I'm going to post on Facebook would be this Udro JPEG, because that has saved settings that save it as a JPEG, 1920 pixels on the long edge, so it doesn't matter if it's horizontal or vertical, the long edge is going to be 1920 pixels. And it's going to add the Utah Desert Remote Observatory's watermark. And so I'll click Export, and that's exporting that file now, cropped, adjusted the way we just adjusted it. And if we go to the Windows Explorer, and if we navigate now to the folder where I keep those images, and there it is as a 1920 pixel wide JPEG with the watermark added from a PNG type file, so it has a transparent background. And that's how you do it. So I apologize that this has been a fairly long video, but I wanted it to be pretty comprehensive all the way from the very beginning through processing in PixInsight, Photoshop, showing how we set up the sequence. So if you're working with data like this, or this data through StarBase, where you can download the database, you can see exactly how it's done, how the data was captured, and you can even follow along if you want to process it in PixInsight and Photoshop. Hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, be sure to drop those in the comments. If you like videos like this, I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel so that you can find it again to see future videos that I might do. And as always, I hope you have a great day today and an even better night tonight under a clear, dark sky. Thanks.